One of my heroes was a little-known Scottish pastor, missionary, named Leslie Newbigin, who was a missionary sent to India and worked in India, eventually became a bishop of South India. Just as an aside, CJ and Sarah, I think y'all knew Leslie Newbigin, didn't you? Yes, you did. I remember talking to you about this. He was very well loved. He worked a lot in ecumenical, interfaith kinds of things in India, was a great pastor, missionary, co-worker with our brothers and sisters in South India. But what makes Leslie Newbigin interesting to me was when he retired. And he came back to live in the United Kingdom, and he wrote a number of books. And in these books, he highlighted what he thought that the greatest mission field in the world today, the greatest area in need of ministry and mission, is not found in some third world countries. It's not found in Africa or Latin America. It is not found overseas. In fact, he argues the greatest mission field today can be found in the West. And a number of people found that rather startling. We're used to thinking of sending missionaries rather than reflecting about how in the West there's this great need for mission work. And he said, it's not because we live in a society that's secular. He says, in fact, he disagrees. He says our civilization, our culture, is one filled with pagan gods of materialism, of power, of imperialism. And that the challenge for the church today is one to ask, where are we being sent? And I found that rather startling, this assertion he made, this being a great mission field, because let's face it, most of us think of our culture here in this country and in our civilization as mostly Christian. Well, there may be less Christians. We do identify mostly as Christian, and while there may be less churches, there's still a number of churches on each corner. And we at least want to assert that our society, our culture, reflects certain Christian values. We believe that. But the past few weeks, I've struggled with that assertion. And the reason why is the news coming out in many ways of a new kind of intensive policy in which undocumented immigrants who come to this country have their children taken from them. Ripped from them. So much so that the parents do not have any idea where their children are. Some as young as 53 weeks old. And I find myself wondering, what is Christian, Christ-like about that? There was a testimony to the Congress in which, and you can see this in the news, 1,500 children who were yanked from these immigrants and refugees are lost. They have no idea where these kids are. And someone testified to Congress, they suspect and have evidence that some of these children have been human trafficked. And I find myself struggling with that reality, this world in which we live in that is so unreflective of what I understand to be Christ's call for compassion and caring and love, especially especially for the stranger. And I wonder to myself, and it occurs to me that Newbegin is right. This culture and society in which we live in is in need of missionaries, of Christ's compassion and caring. And I think we all sense that in some ways, the sense in which our culture seems to be tearing itself apart, the sense of brokenness around us, a sense of unsure what are the core kinds of values that unite us and connect us. We see this in some of the actions of men in the Me Too movement, that sense in which sexual abuse, harassment is a fact of life for women in our society and culture. That we see this in things on YouTube and acts of outright racism and calling names of folks because of the color of their skin. And one wonders, what is so Christ-like about our society and culture today? And it's not necessarily a question we'd like to wrestle with, to be honest. It's not really one that we really think about. We in a safety of this sanctuary for sure. We feel it, but we're unsure what we're supposed to do about it. Here am I, Lord, send me. The vision Isaiah has, it's a rather kind of psychedelic one if you read it, and this incredible experience, maybe it was a dream or something, he had some experience of the grandeur of God. He's encountered God in this vision, the holiness, the beauty, the wonder of God. And he experiences God there. And he knows, I think in some sense, that he's being called. That's why he's having this experience. And it's interesting to me that he begins that sense of calling with this assertion. He says, I am a man of unclean lips, of a people of unclean lips. So there's no self-righteousness to the prophet Isaiah. From the very beginning, he knows that he is as unclean and as broken as the people and community that he's a part of. He begins his sense of calling from that place of confession. I know that being self-righteous feels good. Don't we all? But that's not who we're called to be, right? There's a quote from Thomas Merton, a monk who lived in the latter part of the 20th century, in which he wrote at one point that, and he was a monk who lived in silence and in a monastery, and he said, if you spend enough time alone, if you look deep enough within your soul, if you pay attention enough in prayer to who you are, you will find deep within you this truth, the seeds of Auschwitz and Watts, the seeds of the very things we want to work against. Thomas Merton realized, the prophet Isaiah realized, that the first step in being sent is knowing we're not perfect. We are as broken as the people we serve, and there's no room for self-righteousness in the midst of that. And then, in this very strange vision, there's this angel who comes and touches his lips with a coal. And there's a sense in which he has been set free. The passage says he was relieved from shame and guilt. There's a sense in which part of his empowerment to go forth into the world is a sense of experiencing the love of Christ, the love of God that sets him free. to speak the truth, not because he's self-righteous, but because he has been set free by the grace of God. That's an amazing thing we sometimes forget in the church, and then in the depth of our theologies, that the real experience of Christ's presence in our lives is not self-righteousness or anything like that. It is a sense of freedom to act in ways we couldn't imagine or think we could do. It is a sense of having courage to speak truth to power or to share a neighbor's pain. That grace is ultimately not about some inner experience. It's being set free to do something pretty radical in the world. And what Isaiah, and I would argue what we are about, is that God is saying to us, "Whom shall I send?" And that's not just a question for Isaiah, it's a question for everybody in this room. It's interesting, we opened our worship with the words, "For God so loved the world, God sent the Son into the world." And what does the line say? The Son wasn't sent to what? Condemn the world. The Son was sent to save it, to make it whole, save it from itself. And the scary thing is that we as the church believe that we have been sent to not to condemn the world, but to save it. The very Greek word ecclesia, the word for church is ecclesia. It's the people called out. And the question God asks us this morning and every day is, "Whom shall I send?" And the challenge for us is to acknowledge, or at least embrace the truth, send me. That being church is less about what we're doing here this morning, though that is important and hopefully refills our batteries. But really it's about what we do on Monday and Tuesday. It's about how we might speak out against injustice we encounter, how we care for a stranger, how we might embrace someone who's been pushed aside, about how we may be the ones sent to save the world. Now that, I don't know about you, that kind of freaks me out. Kind of challenges me. Newbigin once said, "The church doesn't have a mission." Kind of startling to start. The church doesn't have a mission. He says, you know what? The church is the mission. You are God's mission in this world to save it. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.